everyone. And congratulations to the Apidays team, a great event. And Brankas is very happy to be a regular participant at these. My presentation is going to be a bit more focused on the commercialization and business aspects of APIs, a little bit less technical and more about how we're seeing implementation of open APIs into embedded finance, open banking, banking as a service, and different usage of financial services as APIs and how that's being used to develop new financial products. I will try and keep it short so that we can have some questions. Small group, so I'll try to keep 5-10 minutes so that we can go back and forth a bit on questions. Very quickly about Brankas. So we're a banking infrastructure company founded in 2016 here in Singapore, but our first operating market was Indonesia, actually. And for those of you who are aware, Indonesia is really kind of the most exciting fintech and technology market generally in Southeast Asia right now, just because of its size and the capital that's been in and the kind of willingness of the population to adopt new technologies. So we do two things. We provide API orchestration for financial institutions. That's really enabling financial institutions, whether it's a bank or a remittance company, e-wallet, non-bank lender, to basically usually go from 0 to 1 in actually enabling their first set of external APIs as products. So it's really consultative, but also a technology component of their stack above their core banking system that allows them to expose commercial APIs and actually manage those at scale using our technology. We also do API aggregation, which is, if you're familiar with the likes of Plaid or TrueLayer or Tink, we're providing an emerging market version of that for data products, payment products, and other product origination and banking as a service solutions, like account opening, loan origination, and even some cards products now. So if you think of kind of the API and financial services economy, there's a supply side and a demand side. The suppliers of the APIs are the financial institutions looking to publish APIs as a monetization channel for their products or as a way to reach new customers. And the demand side is the consumption of those APIs by any type of tech company that wants to enable embedded finance. Now, I use the term open finance. We'll get there in a second, but open finance more and more has a regulatory connotation, like open finance because the central bank requires kind of open banking. We're going to look beyond that because actually a lot of Southeast Asia, the innovation is driven bottom up because financial institutions are seeing ways to actually commercialize APIs as products. Okay, so some principles of open finance. Number one, we can go into definitions, but basically this is about empowering customers to choose to share their financial data and link accounts with third parties. So it's removing the financial product from the channel where the customer accesses that product. And that's a really powerful component of APIs in financial services because banks are bad at building apps, mostly. And so for me to use a financial product here in Singapore where I can link my accounts across SG Findex, or in a market like Philippines where it's much more bottom up and commercial data providers are able to give that portfolio view, it's really about customer choice so that they can pick and choose the products they want. And API technology is fundamental to that. This is also a pro-competition policy. So if you hear banks or bankers associations nervously wanting to slow down open finance regulation, that's because the point of it is to enable competition and reduce some of the barriers, especially that some of the large banks have. So I think I've come to realize, and I know Jerome and some of the other players in this space have come to realize that there's, there is just a lot of internal resistance from large financial institutions who have built what they consider to be a proprietary user base. And so their idea of exposing external APIs, they maybe have a different point of view about when and how that should be done. The other one I want to mention is this is much more than simply see your balance and transactions. So SG Findex is here in Singapore is one small piece of open finance, which is being able to see your balances across banks. But actually, open finance is about API-driven financial services and enabling embedded finance, regardless of whether there's a regulatory requirement. So I'll go through a couple of these, but really my message here is, number one, open finance is a key revenue driver and a new channel for sales, onboarding, and servicing. If you're a financial institution, if you're a fintech, or if you're just a tech company that wants to offer embedded finance to your users. Number two, the open finance tech stack has arrived. So we now have the benefit of 5 or 6 years of best practices to learn what the open banking or open finance API stack is. And third is, we're still early in the adoption curve, but I think this is the time to really start moving and participate in this financial services API economy. So, open finance is much more than data sharing. We are seeing applications for payments, retail and corporate, remittance, crypto transactions. We're seeing open finance for identity and authentication. Here in Singapore, SingPass becomes an example for really the rest of the world in enabling easy authentication, identity verification. I can use my SingPass to log into the OCBC app. I can use it outside of government services. And that's really powerful. And it's something that banks can do. We know of in the Philippines and in Indonesia, some banks offer identity APIs now and are actually offering a KYC product, a know your customer, basically identity verification API. That's not a bank product, but because the bank has already done the verification of their customers, they're able to monetize that at quite a high price point, several dollars per verification. Card issuing and basically blowing up the bank card stack and servicing everything from authentication to credit scoring data to virtual cards for one-time use to actually BNPL and B2B use cases. Investments in brokerage and combining neobanking with investment management. And then an API marketplace where actually banks and financial institutions can start offering third-party services and become something of an app store for other financial services as well. Okay, so a few examples, right? So this is in Singapore, for those of you who are based here. Today in Singapore, if you open the DBS app, you can choose the other banks or other institutions where you have accounts. You authenticate, you give your consent, and you can see all of your account balances, for loan product, checking, savings, card products, all in one place. So it's a very simple, straightforward consent flow. It doesn't work all the time. It does not show your detailed transaction history. So I think it has its limitations, but as a starting point, it's a nice example of very basic data APIs in a semi-closed environment. Really, only the financial institutions within Singapore can have access to. I didn't show the SingPass API, but if you're familiar with this, it's worth checking out. Now, moving beyond SG Findex, this actually has existed for 5 or 6 years now for corporate data aggregation. So Brankas uses Xero, which is an accounting software here in Singapore. And we've given consent to link our UOB statement so that those data feeds flow directly into Xero, and we can basically do automated reconciliation, right? And this is a service that we're very willing to pay for. Xero is thrilled to offer it as a value-added service. It saves tens of hours of manual reconciliation. We can be notified when a payment comes in. We can be notified when payables are due. And so there's actually corporate use cases that are actually more valuable for data aggregation. Moving beyond data, though, right? I want to show some examples that are beyond simply view your balances. So in the Philippines today, you can now do account opening and actually open a bank account inside the GCash e-wallet. Now, what this means is GCash is, by far the main consumer e-wallet in the Philippines. They have 70 million active users. And 4 different banks, Uno Bank, which is a purely digital bank, Maybank, CIMB, and BPI, which is a major universal bank in the Philippines. They all offer fully integrated account opening and account management for a basic retail account inside the GCash app. So I use my KYC, my identity that GCash has already verified. In about 30 seconds, I give consent. I click a couple boxes for anti-money laundering stuff that's additional required. And then I can do some basic account management, having my new BPI account that's linked to my GCash account. So from BPI's perspective, this is super low cost acquisition. I mean, compare this to opening a new branch, opening a kiosk at the mall, telesales, Facebook advertising, versus enabling a tile where you can actually open a bank account inside an e-wallet app. So BPI is happy because they get much lower cost of acquisition. Gcash is happy because they want the customer engagement and they're earning commissions from BPI. And the customer is happy because now they can move funds between their e-wallet and an interest-bearing savings account. And if they want to be upsold into a card product or a loan product or an investment product, then they can download the BPI app and interact with that app natively. It also works for retail payments. So this is the payment initiation use case in the Philippines where I can link my Union Bank account, I can authenticate, and then I can pull funds into my e-wallet in about 10 seconds after I've linked my account. Over to Indonesia. Indonesia now offers SME financing where Tokopedia merchants, Tokopedia is the large e-commerce platform in Indonesia. Tokopedia merchants can agree to share their data on an API back to 11 different lenders. And then inside their merchant portal, different lenders can offer a line of credit for them to buy inventory, right? So this is an instant SME lending product based on an API that goes back to the lenders, and then the lenders can actually score and qualify the SMEs based on that Tokopedia data, which is verified because it's all transactions done on the platform. So compare this to your typical SME lending experience, which is walking into a bank, submitting piles of documents, profit and loss statement, audited financials, registration documents, and then waiting 4 to 6 weeks for a decision, right? This is literally within a minute, and it all takes place based on this verified data, and because Tokopedia and 11 or 12 different lenders have connected via an API interface that allows for this easy onboarding and acquisition. And as soon as the loan is approved, it can be dispersed right into the Tokopedia seller's merchant wallet. So it's really just a 10 or 20x improvement on the previous experience. Back in the Philippines, so we now have the beginnings of fully licensed underwriter financial institutions whose entire distribution model is API driven. So NetBank is actually, the license is Rural Bank of Romblon, which is a very tiny provincial bank, one branch in the Philippines, but they can actually do most of the consumer and SME use cases that are necessary for SMEs, or for consumer and SME online. So what they've done is said, look, we'll keep our one branch, but all of our other distribution is going to be entirely through APIs. We're not going to build apps, we're not going to build branches, we're not going to build agent network. We're going to be the behind-the-scenes infrastructure that's powering the next Revolut, the next e-wallet, the next lender that wants, lending as a service or BNPL product, and they need an underwriter partner. They can do kind of joint risk sharing on new loans. So, NetBank is one of the few banks in Southeast Asia that has started to take an entirely API-driven approach to product development and distribution. We're seeing a couple examples as well in Indonesia, but really that momentum is just now starting. So really your interaction with NetBank, if you're a customer of NetBank, it doesn't look like branches, it looks like this, right? It looks like onboarding to the API sandbox, figuring out which payment or data or identity or lending APIs or card APIs you want to make available, and then surfacing those inside your app that's facing the users. Some other examples that you may be familiar with, Solaris Bank, Community Federal Savings Bank, which is a white labeled bank that was serving TransferWise out of the US, Cross River and others. So there's a lot of developed market examples, and we're just starting to see the very first banks on this table that are starting to offer the emerging market examples of banking as a service and open finance. So I want to give just a few minutes for questions. So I will, I'll leave it here for now. But why do banks think about APIs, and why are they launching open finance products? Number one is, this is a way for financial institutions to reach new customers, change the economics of acquisition and account servicing by building an API product set. But I think what Brankas has learned, and really core to our business model actually, is that financial service providers do not know how to have APIs as products. They are learning this from scratch for the most part, right? There are some very good technology teams. There's some very forward-thinking bank CEOs and digital heads, digital transformation heads. But in terms of technology architecture and in terms of like product management capabilities, they're learning this from scratch. So they need, actually, financial institutions need help from API technology companies to help them go from 0 to 1 or 1 to 10 in some cases. And that's where Brankas and other companies can really help them. So some financial institutions are thinking about new customer acquisition and engagement. In Indonesia, for example, we're seeing a lot of momentum with SME banking, where there, this is a large archipelago. SME banking can be more profitable for an FI, but they need an easier way to reach them. And plugging into SaaS or other apps that are already serving SMEs can be a faster distribution channel. New fee revenue, where the banks can actually monetize transactions like identity, payments, and customer data beyond their core banking products. Platform revenue, we're seeing more and more FIs offer basically an app store or marketplace of APIs that they can bundle into their own mobile banking app, or that they can offer their partner ecosystem. And data insights, so that a lender, like the Tokopedia example, can instantly score an SME and offer them a line of credit inside an e-commerce app. And then product innovation, where they don't, bank doesn't need to build a new app to serve SMEs or to serve the affluent segment or to serve the agricultural community. They just can provide the APIs that plug into those apps and serve those communities profitably. So I'll pause there. Maybe we have a few minutes for questions. Anyone? Happy to take questions on the business side, on the technical side, or anything else about kind of how APIs in fintech are developing.
Any questions? Yes.
Hi. Yeah, so questions about platform like this in terms of protection, their license. Are you just like
Great question. Normally we are not. There isn't a licensing category for API middleware. The risk is on the bank, and the bank needs to, or the FI needs to evaluate the API management provider as if they were any other software vendor, right? Now, that is changing. So in Indonesia, for example, if you are an API provider facilitating payments, you have to be registered under the payment system framework called PJP in Indonesia. So basically, you have to have a full payment gateway license in Indonesia. We actually, to be honest, we pushed back against that because we said, look, we're not intermediating, we're not settling transactions, we're a software layer providing bank, funds transfers on the rail that the bank manages. We're just managing the consent and the permissions. But Bank Indonesia quite explicitly was like, no, we are designing the regulations to manage the initiation layer, not just payment intermediaries. But generally speaking, if we're working with a financial institution, we are a software vendor and they need to do their due diligence. And the way we help that is by having the proper ISO and we have PCI DSS certification, even though we're not processing card payments. But that's something that usually the FI's risk team and the central bank's risk team can understand. It's a good question, though. Thank you. Other questions from the back?
I have.
Yes, please.
So earlier in particularly in this environment where can't afford buying on it.
Yep.
So what are some
Yeah.
About what?
Yeah.
Attractiveness and viability.
It's a great question as well. Let me give a real world example with NetBank, right? So Brankas in the Philippines, we provide payment and account opening APIs powered by NetBank. So we're not the underwriter, NetBank is the underwriter, but we're providing a standard API for payment, for customers to do payments or disbursements. And from the customer's point of view, if the API fails, their problem is the product doesn't work, it's all broken, there must be something wrong with Brankas. So we have to have a whole customer support team that is diagnosing where in the chain it's breaking. And that is we underestimated how challenging that is, because you may have, we'll be diagnosing the root cause of an issue, and maybe it's the core banking provider, which is also cloud-based, of NetBank that's failing. Maybe it's NetBank at the services level. Maybe it is Brankas because we had some downtime, God forbid, right? Or maybe it's actually the way that the client has integrated the app that's surfacing these APIs, or maybe it's a user failure at the end user, right? So there are 4 or 5 pieces of the chain, and as you build embedded finance use cases, you're seeing 5 or 6 parties, all of which have to work in sync, or else the user is unhappy because the product broke. So the way we think about partnerships is really having, obviously the technical integration needs to be damn near perfect, but we also need to have the internal support capabilities with our partners to make sure that we can very quickly diagnose or have early warning system when some of the underlying API services are breaking. And particularly in financial services, right? Because if this doesn't work, the customer's payment was declined, even if it's showing success, for example, right? And then there can be a massive explosion there.
Thanks very much
Thanks.
for sharing. Okay, thanks.
Please.
Very quick.
In open finance, as the data that consumers or clientele put, right, does that get retained by Brankas as a company?
Yeah.
And in that area, how do you take care of, like GDPR, likes
Yeah.
of privacy?
Yeah, that is a business choice that different open finance API providers make. We choose not to store customer data because a lot of our customers are lenders or FIs, and we need to tell them with zero conflict of interest, we are not building profiles on your customers. We do not plan to cherry pick your best customers and sell them to a different lender, right? And so we say, look, we're going to be the pipes and the infrastructure to connect you and your customer to a third-party app, right? But others don't, right? Others say, look, we can build credit profiles and insights, and we can start to build a data engine to support your business in addition to our API plumbing, right? And that's also a great business case. You require then an analytics function, and you have to deal with concerns about the banks basically sharing their customers' data, knowing that you're building profiles on those same customers. So it's purely a business choice. In terms of data privacy regulation, that's where each market has its own specifics. So Indonesia is actually a little bit behind. They're very forward-thinking in certain areas of fintech, but the data protection, they've only recently passed legislation on a proper data protection law. They do not have a single data protection regulator, right? The Philippines does, actually. The Philippines has a National Privacy Commission. Singapore does, Thailand does. But what's also what we're seeing is, if you're following the global best practices and you provide the local kind of privacy registration, it's usually not a licensing process. It's more of a proactive registration process. So it's not a business hindrance if you're already following good data protection practice. Yeah, it's a good question.
Okay. Thanks very much, Todd.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.